feel that I'm losing you as an audience, I'm usually going to drop a swear word or something. But I was told by Kimberly I couldn't use swear words because there might be little ears around. So for that reason, I'm going to keep it short today, okay? So normally I talk for like hours at times, but today I'm going to try to keep it to like 15 minutes or so, okay? The other thing is, I was up all night tossing and turning, being nervous about talking to people, because this is a different audience than I'm normally used to, okay? So sometimes when I'm tired, two things happen. One, I kind of slump a little bit. So if you see me slumping, just kind of sit, proper in your chair. Now, cue me to kind of sit up straight. But then also, when I was younger, I had speech impediment. Okay. So sometimes when I'm tired, my speech impediment comes out. So if I stumble over a word, or if I misspeak a little bit, just kind of look past it. Okay. Have some sympathy on me. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to define bullying. We're going to discuss risk factors for bullying. And then the main thing, I think Kimberly asked me to come here so I can give you some advice from a mental health professional of if your child is bullied or if your child is doing bullying behavior, how can you as a parent maybe address it? And then if we have time, we can talk briefly about the effects of bullying, okay? And so I want you to appreciate then that this is a primer, okay? So there's a lot more stuff that we're not going to talk about, right? Because I could easily put what I'm doing here to an hour or so lecture, and as any faculty or administrators know, like they have day-long or weekend-long courses of bullying. Okay, so there's much more that I'm not going to say that I'll defer to people who know more than me. Okay, so first, to define bullying, it's unwanted aggressive behavior among school-age children, but there is either a real or perceived power imbalance. Okay. And it's either repeated or has a potential to be repeated, okay? So that's actually defined by the Centers for Disease Prevention and Control. So it's not just conflict between two students. So me and my buddies growing up, often would be in conflict with each other. But if we're just, arguing or whatever, that's not bullying. Because oftentimes in those situations, when one student recognizes maybe they're hurting the feelings of the other student, they stop, okay? So, pardon me. So the aggressive behavior part. So there's a lot more stuff in that than what you may think. So there's the obvious, physical, the hitting, the kicking, the shoving, the threatening. There's verbal aggression. This can be oral or written name calling, graffiti, threats. More subtle and more hard to pick up on is relational bullying. So this is where it's a rumor spreading or trying to embarrass somebody else, especially in cyber bullying, or social isolation. What is that? That's hate. We're not going to play with so-and-so today, okay? And then the power imbalance. What is that part of bullying? Well, first, obviously, it can be the physical characteristics. So an older child, a bigger child, a stronger child. But also it can be popularity or an association with popular peer groups. It can be demographic or background. So whether or not the person bullying or being bullied is a member of a minority or majority class. It can be about academic abilities and skills, whether or not the student is particularly good in academics or physically talented or artistically talented. It can just be being outnumbered, okay? So a group of students can bully one student. But then obviously, if any sort of weapon or any sort of external thing that creates the power. And then with repetition, it's important to mention that the Centers of Disease define it that it can be repeated or potential to be repeated. So any one incident of bullying, you don't have to wait for it to become a pattern before you intervene, okay? So that's kind of the definition of bullying and kind of breaking down those domains. So for me as a psychiatrist, what I'm most interested in is kind of these risk factors for bullying, right? So I became a forensic psychiatrist because I want to know why criminally insane do the stuff that they do, right? And so what interests me about bullying the most is how or why do children become children who bully behavior, okay? And so it's multi-dynamic. There's individual, family, peer, social, and even community risk factors that can go into a child developing bullying behaviors. So first, with the individual child himself, temperament plays a role. So kids that are active or hot-headed type of temperament are more prone to be bullying, whereas the quiet and passive temperaments are more likely to be victims. I was so shy in school. Somebody Somebody asked how shy was I? I was so shy in school that in 8th grade, in Miss Anderson's math class, I talked in class. I asked a question, and she wrote my name up on the board and the date that I talked and said, Raymond Molden speaks in class. I never said another word. You know, as I was preparing for this lecture, Kimberly asked me, were you ever bullied before your cool phase? And I'm like, what phase? Right? But I was quiet and passive, and I wore glasses, and I had a speech impediment. So yeah, so now and then I was potentially bullied. That makes me question. So one thing I forgot to do at the beginning, I forgot to ask. I told you a little bit about myself, but I forgot to ask about you guys. So can you raise your hand if you've never told a lie? One. Yeah, still pure. I love it. What about anybody has never stolen anything? As simple as even like a paperclip. A couple of you? Okay. So one of my questions is, Kimberly, why did you invite me to speak to this den of thieves and liars? All right. So now that I know that you're thieves and liars, anybody here, could you be a bully? Could you be bullied? And the answer is yes. Okay. Anyone can be a bully, and anyone can be bullied. I meant to say that before I got into the risk factors. Lack of social competence, okay? So children who don't really know how to get along with other children, often they act out with bullying behavior, okay? And then if a child has depression or a disability, or if they question their sexual orientation or are gay or lesbian or transsexual, they're at high risk of being bullied. So there's individual factors that play a role not only in bullying, but being bullied. There's peer risk factors. So if your child associates with other delinquents that are aggressive or violent, then they are more likely to bully. But peers can also have a positive influence. So there's research that shows that lack of social isolation can be protective from bullying. So how do they find that? If a child can have at least one best friend, actually is protected from bullying others. And then also those peers that feel supported by their peers, or if they are supported by their peers after their bullying, both decrease bullying behavior and decreases the implications or the damage that bullying can cause. Okay, and so there's one study that showed when peers intervene, okay, so kind of spontaneous on the fly, 57% of all bullying behavior stops. Right? So a bully or a child who bullies, you know, if there's no bystander that speaks up, they're more likely to continue the behavior. Or if the child who's bullying kind of sees, hey, I'm getting the attention from these people that are just watching, that increases the bullying behavior. But if the peers say, hey man, that's not cool, or hey, let's just leave this guy alone, oftentimes the bullying behavior will stop. So peers are a big deal here. Family risk factors, okay? So lack of parental engagement, those parents who may not engage with their child, they may have their own stuff going on, but it affects the child, and they're more likely to act out. Parental conflict or parental use of drugs or alcohol, domestic violence, or child maltreatment obviously increases the risk of both being bullied and doing bullying behavior themselves. And parenting style as well. So overly harsh parenting style or overly permissive parenting style actually increases the risk of bullying behavior. When I was studying child adolescent psychiatry, there's this concept of good enough parenting, okay? So you don't have to be the best parent, right? Because there's no such thing. You just have to be good enough, right? So not too overly harsh, not too overly permissive, kind of that mid-road. And that is protective from bullying behavior. The school climate, whether the children have a sense of belonging to the school, I don't know, like, you know, having a creed that they recite, and then the degree of respect and fair treatment that the children view from their school also decreases the risk of bullying. And obviously, good adult supervision, awareness, and responsiveness of staff when bullying does occur, okay? And so almost all states have laws about bullying and what the schools have to do. And pardon. And then lastly, there's community risk factors. So if you grow up in an unsafe neighborhood, and if you have no connection to other adults in that neighborhood, then you're more likely to become a child who has bullying behavior. So then how do we address it, right? So as a psychiatrist, this is kind of where hopefully I can add some insight into human behavior. So whenever Kimberly and I are in disagreement about parenting, I will drop the line like, "Excuse me, who's the expert in human behavior here?" I lose that argument every time. I don't know how I lose it, though. I thought I had such a good thing. So, the first thing to do is the most important thing to do. If you come home and your child tells you he's being bullied, you need to be thankful right then. Why? 57 to 75% of kids don't tell anyone, okay? So most bullying, the child suffers in silence, okay? So the first thing is be thankful and listen, okay? So the main thing that the child needs is someone to listen and reassure them that it's not their fault, okay? Because like I said, 50 to 75% of kids don't report the bullying, and the reason is that it can be hard to talk about, right? So because often kids who are bullied internalize blame and fault. Or, like we already mentioned before, there's some risk factors that bullying kids have, whether they're depressed or have disabilities or whatever, and so then they start to even blame themselves even more, and then that can even further internalize, and so then you actually get this cycle where what maybe started the start of them as being identified as a victim to bullying actually then can perpetuate further bullying, okay? So the number one thing is to listen and reassure them, okay? And reassure them that it's not their fault. You may want to give advice of what to do, okay? How to handle it. And this may be things like, if it's a certain area in the hallway when they're by themselves, whether they walk with friends, whether they avoid being alone, whether or not they, use humor or try to, otherwise cope with it. So, the next step is then working with the school, okay? So notifying the school, seeing if it's been reported, because again, this is out of the scope of this talk, but all schools have bullying policy, okay? And then you also want to kind of develop a game plan, again, where you involve your students' teachers, the student, maybe even their peers, to try to avoid situations that might put them at higher risk. And almost as important as listening, the next few points are mistakes to avoid, okay? Because one thing as a parent, you don't want to make it worse. So, you never want to tell the child just to ignore the bullying, okay? Because odds are they've probably already done that, okay? And that's what the 50 to 75% of people who aren't reporting bullying are probably doing, okay? So then when they're coming to you for help, they want you to help themselves through the situation. So telling them to ignore the bullying doesn't work, okay? You don't want to blame the child for being bullied, obviously, we talked about that. Now, some kids may have certain issues where they get on the child who bullies needs, and the child who's bullied may feel justified, but still, you want to be firm in the boundaries that they didn't cause it. You don't want your child, you don't want to tell them to fight back, okay? There's a ton of research out here when you look at outcomes of kids who are bullied and kids who are bullied. The worst outcomes are actually those children who bully and are victims of bullies, okay? So often a kid may get bullied and then act out because of that and bully others. And those kids actually have the worst outcomes for depression, social isolation, poor academic achievement, and other things, okay? And probably the most important thing when I hear about people's responses is you probably want to avoid the urge to contact the parent of the child who is bullied, okay? Why? Because you're the parent of the child who is targeted, and you probably have a good amount of emotion, okay? So what you want to do is use the school, use the administrators as a mediator to help resolve the situation, okay? Because otherwise, the data has shown it just makes situations worse, okay? And because you can imagine that if you're, if you are a parent and you're called by another parent and they say, your child is bullying my child, what is your normal response going to be? You're going to immediately go on the defensive, right? Why? Because you're not given any data, you're not given the information, you're not given the situation or the context. And so Mama Bear or Papa Bear is going to protect their cub, right? And so that's the expectation that you should think about on the other side. So that then takes us to, what do you do if you get the call that, hey, we think your child is engaged in bullying behavior? Now hopefully you picked up on the fact throughout this, unless I messed up, I've tried not to call the kids bullies, okay? Because when you label a child a bully, they internalize that, and then they become that identity, that they are a bully. And then once you have a label and once you have an identity, it's harder to change, okay? But if you're a child who has done bullying behavior, you can always change behavior, okay? So, maybe it's semantics or whatnot, but words do matter, right? So, the first thing to do if you are notified that your child is bullying is the child must know what the behavior that he did is wrong and then why it is wrong, okay? Show that bullying is taken seriously, and you want to do this in a calm fashion, okay? Anger and rage may not be the best avenue to use when you're trying to perhaps diffuse anger and rage in your child, okay? Do you want to work with the other child to kind of understand the reasons that he may have bullied, okay? So like I said, bullies who are also bully victims have the worst outcomes. So not every kid who bullies isn't a bad kid, right? There may be their own issues going on. So whether or not they were having problems fitting in, all right, so they may act out. And if you can identify that's the case, you want to help them become more involved in different either clubs or sports or activities to where they can show leadership, they can show cooperation, and they can find other ways to fit in other than feeling like they have to bully to fit in. Obviously, we talk about, if bullying is being heavily influenced by some family circumstances, those issues at home like abuse or apparent substance abuse, they may need more intervention, perhaps from even a mental health counselor or professional. When you use consequences for the behavior, it's encouraged that you use consequences that can help teach empathy, okay? So whether this is having them lead a discussion about what it means to be a good friend, doing a story about the benefits of teamwork, making a presentation about cooperation and respect, doing a project about civil rights or bullying, reading a book about bullying. These are all things that can be consequences to the behavior, but also may help reshape the cognitive process that the child is having going on. Also maybe involve the kid in making amends, like writing a letter to apologize, doing a good deed for the other child that was bullied or for others in the community, or if they damage property of the child, making restitutions, okay? So again, there's other strategies when you have a child who is doing the bully behavior to avoid. So the 0 tolerance, 3 strikes rules usually don't work, right? The reason is because both students and teachers are much less likely to report the behavior if they're gone after 1, 2, or 3 strikes. Conflict resolution, kind of sitting down the target and the child who's bullying, sitting down and working it out together usually doesn't work. Why? Because like we defined, they have unequal power, okay? And so by sitting them down together and addressing it like it's both of yours fault, kind of defeats the purpose and the help that the child who's targeted needs. And then group treatment, group therapy doesn't really help for bullying behavior either, because before the childs are ready for change, they tend to reinforce the bullying behavior in the others. Like I work with a lot of antisocial guys, adults, and oftentimes they, it's like a kind of a machismo thing about who has, done the most, stuff, right? And then follow-up, okay? So bullying is a complex thing that obviously is not resolved spontaneously. So it's one of those things that frequently may be need to be reinforced. So I want to mention 2 words about prevention, all right? Prevention, what's the saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of medicine or something like that? So educate your children about bullying, being aware of bullying. Tell them, hey, if you see one of your friends bullying another kid, hey, tell them that's not cool. Show empathy, read books about kindness, that kind of stuff. And so kids are sponges, all right? They model so much more than what we think they do. And so that includes how you, as a parent, act towards others, comments you may make, or the interactions that you may have. So for time purposes, I'm not going to go over the whole effects of bullying, other than just to highlight kids who are bullied and kids who are bullied have more depression, social isolation, poor academic status. Kids who are bully victims especially turn to alcohol and drugs. But I do want to end with a little comment or two about bullying and suicide, okay? Because there's a lot of misconceptions out there, because there's a lot of heart-wrenching stories out there you see on the news that so-and-so killed themselves because they were bullied. That's probably an oversimplification, okay? Suicide, like bullying itself, is a very complex situation. So yes, kids who are bullied and kids who bully are at higher risk of having suicidal thoughts and ideas. Kids who are bully victims are even higher, but it's just one of the numerous risk factors that end up leading to that behavior. And some of those other ones are depression, anxiety, hopelessness, family conflict, relationship problems, and whatnot. So the way I think of it is, whereas if you look at child drowning, okay, so lack of adult supervision is a risk factor for child drowning, right? But it doesn't cause the drowning. That's how I view bullying and suicide. So bullying is a risk factor, but it doesn't necessarily cause, because there's usually a lot of other things going into it that cause it, okay? So I'll end there. I think I did my 15 minutes. You want to just do questions afterwards? I'll stick around or that? Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for your attention, guys.